In the blood-soaked arena of ancient Rome, Marcus Aurelius Maximus, a hardened gladiator who has survived countless battles, faces what he believes will be his final opponent. But when he raises his sword for the killing blow, the words spoken by a mysterious woman in the crowd will shatter everything he thought he knew about his past, his purpose, and the very reason he was forced into the arena. What she reveals will bring the mighty warrior to his knees and change the course of both their destinies forever. The roar of 50,000 voices crashed down upon the arena like thunder from the gods themselves. Marcus Aurelius Maximus stood in the center of the Colosseum, his bronze-muscled chest heaving as blood from his latest victim pooled at his feet. The afternoon sun blazed overhead, casting long shadows across the sand that had drunk the blood of so many men before him. For 7 years he had been the champion of this cursed place, and for 7 years he had dreamed of nothing but freedom. The crowd's chant echoed off the marble walls, "Maximus, Maximus, Maximus," but their adoration felt like chains around his soul. He was no hero, he was a slave, a killer, a man who had lost everything that once mattered to him. His calloused hand gripped the gladius that had become an extension of his very being, its steel blade reflecting the faces of those who cheered for his victories while remaining blind to his suffering. Emperor Commodus rose from his golden throne in the imperial box, his jeweled hands catching the light as he gestured for silence. The arena fell quiet so completely that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat drumming in his ears. "Citizens of Rome," the emperor's voice boomed across the stadium. "Today our champion faces his greatest challenge yet. But first, let us honor those who have fallen in service to our glory." Marcus's jaw tightened. He had heard this speech countless times, had watched Commodus play to the crowd's bloodlust, while real men died for sport. But today felt different. There was something in the air, a tension that made his battle-scarred skin prickle with unease. His dark eyes scanned the crowd, noting the usual mix of senators in their togas, merchants clutching wine cups, and common citizens who had saved for months to witness the spectacle. Then his gaze stopped. In the front row of the patrician section, barely 20 feet from where he stood, sat a woman unlike any he had ever seen. Her auburn hair caught the sunlight like spun copper, and her emerald eyes seemed to look not at him, but into him. She wore a simple white stola that marked her as nobility, but there was something about her bearing, her expression, that set her apart from the other pampered aristocrats. While they shouted and gestured wildly, she sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, watching him with an intensity that made his breath catch. "And now," Commodus continued, his voice rising to a fevered pitch, "let us see if our champion can defeat not one, but 3 opponents at once." The crowd erupted in frenzied excitement as 3 gates simultaneously creaked open. From each emerged a gladiator, and Marcus felt his blood turn to ice as he recognized them. Brutus the Gaul, whose massive frame had crushed a dozen men beneath his warhammer. Quintus the Quick, a Retiarius whose net and trident had ended more lives than plague. And finally Cassius the Cruel, a former Roman legionnaire whose hatred for Marcus burned as hot as forge fire. This was no ordinary match. This was an execution disguised as entertainment. Marcus shifted into a fighting stance, his gladius held before him like a prayer to Mars, god of war. The 3 men began to circle him like wolves, stalking wounded prey. He had defeated each of them in individual combat before, but together they represented certain death. The crowd sensed it too. Their cheers took on a different quality, anticipation mixed with the perverse excitement of witnessing a legend's fall. Brutus struck first, his warhammer whistling through the air where Marcus's head had been a heartbeat before. The gladiator rolled to his left, coming up just in time to deflect Quintus's trident with his blade. The clash of metal on metal rang like a bell across the arena. Cassius lunged forward with his short sword, aiming for Marcus's exposed ribs, but years of training and countless battles had honed the champion's reflexes to inhuman sharpness. For 10 minutes that felt like hours, Marcus danced the dance of death, with his 3 opponents. His blade found flesh twice, a deep cut across Brutus's thigh that sent him stumbling, and a slash that opened Quintus's shoulder to the bone. But they kept coming, and Marcus could feel his strength beginning to ebb. A glancing blow from Cassius's pommel split his lip, and Brutus's hammer caught his left arm with enough force to crack bone. The crowd's roar became a hurricane of sound as Marcus stumbled, his vision blurring from exhaustion and pain. This was how it would end then, not in his homeland, not surrounded by family and friends, but in this pit of sand and blood, dying for the entertainment of people who saw him as nothing more than a beast. But as he raised his eyes for what he believed would be the last time, he saw her again. The woman with the copper hair had risen from her seat, her hands pressed to her heart, her lips moving in what appeared to be a prayer. And in that moment, something inside Marcus ignited. Not just the will to survive, but something deeper, something that reminded him of the man he had been before Rome had stolen everything from him. With a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the Colosseum, Marcus surged forward. His blade found Quintus's heart with surgical precision, dropping the Rotarius in his tracks. He spun like a whirlwind, his gladius opening Brutus's throat in a spray of crimson. The giant toppled like a felled oak, his war hammer clattering uselessly across the blood-soaked sand. That left only Cassius, and the hatred in the former legionnaire's eyes burned bright enough to rival the sun itself. They circled each other, 2 masters of death, seeking the perfect opening. When Cassius finally attacked, it was with the fury of a man who had nothing left to lose, but Marcus was ready. He sidestepped the thrust, grabbed his opponent's sword arm, and drove his gladius between the ribs with the precision of a surgeon. Cassius fell to his knees, blood frothing from his lips. "Curse you," he whispered, "curse you, and all who—" His words died with him as he pitched forward onto the arena floor. The Colosseum exploded in a cacophony of cheers and applause. Marcus stood amid the carnage, his chest heaving, his body painted with blood, both his own and his enemies', but he felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only the familiar emptiness that followed every victory. He had killed again, had given the crowd their spectacle, and tomorrow there would be another fight, another death, another step closer to his own inevitable end. Commodus rose from his throne, his arms spread wide in a gesture of magnanimous approval. "Behold," he cried, "once again our champion proves that the gods favor Rome above all nations." The emperor's eyes glittered with cruel amusement as he extended his hand, thumb held horizontally. The crowd's chanting reached fever pitch as they waited for his decision. Marcus knew the ritual. He would approach the fallen gladiators, raise his sword and wait for the emperor's signal. Thumbs up meant mercy, a rare occurrence. Thumbs down meant death. But as he walked toward Cassius's still form, something made him pause. The woman with the copper hair was on her feet now, and tears were streaming down her face. But these were not tears of excitement or bloodlust. They were tears of genuine anguish, as if each death in the arena caused her physical pain. Her emerald eyes met his across the blood-soaked sand, and in them he saw something that stopped his heart. Recognition. She knew him. Somehow, impossibly, this patrician woman knew who he was beneath the scars and the bronze skin and the legend of Maximus the Gladiator. But that was impossible. Everyone from his old life was dead, killed in the purges that had led to his enslavement. His wife, his children, his friends, all murdered by Commodus's order 7 years ago. Marcus raised his gladius above Cassius's body, but his hand trembled. The woman's lips were moving again, and though he could not hear her words over the crowd's roar, he could read them on her lips, 2 words that made his world tilt on its axis. "My brother." The sword fell from his nerveless fingers, clattering onto the blood-stained sand. Marcus staggered backward, his mind reeling. It couldn't be possible. His sister Aurelia had died with the rest of his family. He had seen her name on the death warrant, had mourned her loss along with all the others. But those eyes that face, they were older now, marked by years of grief and hardship, but they belonged to the little girl who had once braided flowers in her hair and begged him to tell her stories of the gods. The crowd's cheering faltered as they realized something was wrong. Commodus leaned forward on his throne, his face darkening with displeasure at this breach of protocol. "Maximus," he commanded, "finish it." But Marcus could not move. He stood transfixed, staring at the woman who claimed to be his sister who was supposed to be dead, his sister who had somehow survived the massacre that had destroyed everything he loved. Around him, the arena began to blur as 7 years of suppressed grief and rage and desperate hope crashed down upon him like a collapsing wall. The gladiator who had never bent the knee to emperor or god, who had faced death 1,000 times without flinching, slowly sank to his knees on the blood-soaked sand of the Colosseum floor. The silence that followed was deafening. 50,000 Romans sat transfixed as their invincible champion knelt motionless in the arena, his shoulders shaking with emotions too powerful to contain. The gladius lay forgotten beside Cassius's cooling corpse, its blade catching the afternoon light like a mirror, reflecting Marcus's shattered soul. Emperor Commodus rose from his throne, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. This was not how the spectacle was supposed to unfold. The crowd had come to see blood and glory, not vulnerability and weakness from their champion. "Guards," his voice cut through the stunned quiet like a whip crack. "Bring me the gladiator." But before the Praetorian guards could move, the woman with copper hair did something that would be spoken of in Rome for generations. She vaulted over the marble barrier that separated the patrician seats from the arena floor, her white stola billowing around her like the wings of a dove. The crowd gasped in collective shock as she landed gracefully on the sand and began walking toward Marcus, her emerald eyes never leaving his face. "Aurelia, no!" The shout came from an elderly man in senator's robes who had been sitting beside her. "Return at once. You'll be killed." But Aurelia continued walking, each step bringing her closer to the kneeling gladiator who had once been the most beloved general in all of Rome. The guards hesitated, uncertain whether to stop a patrician woman or obey their emperor's command to seize Marcus. In that moment of confusion, she reached her brother and dropped to her knees beside him in the blood-stained sand. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice barely audible but carrying across the suddenly silent arena with crystal clarity. "My beloved brother, I have searched for you for 7 long years." Marcus raised his head, and those watching saw something that no gladiator should ever reveal, tears streaming down the face of Rome's greatest warrior. His voice, when it came, was broken and raw. "Aurelia, but you're dead. They told me you were all dead. Wife, children, sister, all murdered by Commodus's order." She reached out with trembling fingers to touch the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from his first year in the arena. Would have been, if not for Senator Gracchus." She glanced back at the elderly man who had tried to stop her. "He saved me, hid me, gave me a new identity. I became his ward, his adopted daughter. But I never stopped looking for you." The crowd was growing restless, confused by this dramatic turn. Some shouted for the guards to intervene. Others called for the woman to be thrown to the lions. But many simply watched in fascination as the greatest love story and tragedy of their time unfolded before their eyes. Commodus's voice boomed across the arena, dripping with venom. "Enough of this touching reunion. Guards, seize them both. The woman has violated sacred ground, and the gladiator has defied imperial command." 20 Praetorian guards marched onto the sand, their bronze armor glinting in the sun, their spears lowered toward the kneeling siblings. But as they approached, something extraordinary happened. Marcus slowly rose to his feet, and when he did, he seemed to grow taller, broader, more imposing than ever before. The broken slave was gone, replaced by the ghost of the general who had once conquered Germania and brought glory to Rome. "I am Marcus Aurelius Maximus," his voice carried to every corner of the Colosseum, rich with authority and barely contained power. commander of the armies of the north, general of the Felix legions, loyal servant to the true emperor, Marcus Aurelius, father to a murdered son, husband to a murdered wife, and I will have my vengeance in this life or the next. The crowd erupted. Half cheered at this dramatic declaration, while the other half shouted in confusion and fear. Many had heard whispers of the general who had disappeared 7 years ago, the emperor's adopted son's greatest rival, who had vanished on the very day Marcus Aurelius died. But to see him here, alive, transformed into their beloved gladiator champion, it was beyond anything they could have imagined. Senator Gracchus stood in the patrician section, his weathered face pale with shock and something that might have been hope. He had known this day might come, had dreaded it and prayed for it in equal measure. For 7 years he had protected Aurelia, watched her search desperately for any trace of her lost brother, seen her heart break a little more each time a lid proved false. And now here he was, alive but forever changed by years of slavery and violence. Commodus's face had turned purple with rage. This revelation threatened everything, his legitimacy, his power, his very life. Marcus Maximus had been the people's choice to succeed. Marcus Aurelius, the one man who could have challenged Commodus's claim to the throne. If the people believed he still lived, it could spark a revolution. Lies, the emperor screamed. This slave speaks lies. Marcus Maximus died 7 years ago, executed for treason against Rome. But Marcus was no longer listening to Commodus. His attention had focused entirely on his sister, this miracle that had walked back into his life when he had given up all hope. "How did you survive?" he asked, gently taking her hands in his scarred and calloused ones. "I saw the death warrant. Your name was on it." Aurelia's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Gracchus came to warn us, but it was too late for the others. Livia and the children were already—" She couldn't finish the words, but I was visiting the temple of Vesta when the soldiers came. Gracchus found me there, told me what had happened. We staged my death. A body burned beyond recognition, my jewelry left behind. Everyone believed I had perished with the others. The guards had stopped their advance, uncertain how to proceed in the face of this revelation. If this gladiator truly was Marcus Maximus, he was technically still a Roman citizen, still a general of Rome. Killing him without trial would be murder, not execution, and the crowd was growing more sympathetic by the moment. Romans loved nothing more than a story of family reunited against impossible odds. "For 7 years I lived in secret," Aurelia continued, her voice growing stronger. "But I never believed you were truly dead. There were rumors, whispers of a gladiator who fought like a Roman general, who carried himself like nobility even in chains. I attended every games, watched every fight, hoping against hope, and I fought believing I had nothing left to live for." Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Every victory was empty, every day a step closer to joining you all in the afterlife. If I had known you lived, you would have found a way to escape, to come for me." "I know." She smiled through her tears. "You always protected me, even when we were children. Do you remember? You taught me to ride horses, to read the stars, to be brave when father went away to war." The memories came flooding back, a lifetime ago, when he had been a young officer full of dreams and honor, when his greatest worry had been whether his little sister would grow up to be wise and strong. He remembered teaching her to braid her own hair because their mother had died young, remembered her laughter echoing through their villa's gardens, remembered promising her that he would always keep her safe. "I failed you," he whispered. "I failed everyone." "No," Aurelia said fiercely, gripping his hands tighter. "You survived. Against all odds, against all hope, you survived, and now we can be a family again." But even as she spoke those words, they both knew it wasn't that simple. He was still a slave, still property of the state. She was a patrician woman who had just committed a grave offense by entering the arena, and Commodus would never allow this reunion to threaten his power. The emperor seemed to realize this as well. His initial rage was cooling into something far more dangerous, calculated malice. Touching, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the arena. But even if this slave's claims were true, it changes nothing. Marcus Maximus was declared dead 7 years ago. This creature is property of the state, a gladiator born in chains, and the woman has violated sacred law by entering the arena uninvited. He turned to address the crowd directly, his politician's instincts taking over. Citizens of Rome, do not let sentiment cloud your judgment. This man is a killer, a slave who has entertained you with blood and death. Would you see our traditions overturned for the sake of pretty words and crocodile tears? But the crowd was no longer entirely with him. The revelation had stirred something in the Roman soul, their love of heroic drama, their respect for family bonds, their admiration for courage in the face of impossible odds. Voices began calling out from different sections, "Let them go! Free the general! Honor the family!" Senator Gracchus saw his moment and seized it. The elderly statesman stood, his voice carrying the authority of decades, in the Senate. "Citizens, I call for a formal hearing. If this man is truly Marcus Maximus, then grave injustices have been committed. Roman law demands nothing," Commodus snarled. "I am emperor, I am the law." But his words only inflamed the crowd further. Romans prided themselves on their legal system, their sense of justice. To hear their emperor dismiss the law so casually struck at the very heart of what they believed Rome represented. In the arena, Marcus and Aurelia rose to their feet together, still holding hands like children afraid of being separated. Around them, the 20 Praetorian guards maintained their circle, but their spear points had lowered slightly. Many of these men were veterans who had served under generals like Marcus, and they were clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "What happens now?" Aurelia asked quietly. Marcus looked around the arena, at the crowd shouting for justice, at the guards whose loyalty was clearly wavering, at the emperor whose face was twisted with barely controlled fury. Then he looked at his sister, this miracle who had given him back his name, his identity, his reason to live. "Now," he said, his voice carrying the authority of the general he had once been, "we remind Rome what honor truly means." He stepped away from Aurelia and addressed the crowd directly, his gladiator's training allowing his voice to reach every corner of the massive arena. "People of Rome, for 7 years I have bled for your entertainment, I have killed for your pleasure, I have given you spectacle and glory while my heart died a little more each day." The crowd fell silent, hanging on his every word. "But today I remember who I am. I am Marcus Aurelius Maximus, and I say to you that Rome has lost her way. We have become a nation that celebrates death over life, conquest over justice, fear over love." Commodus was frantically gesturing to his guards, but they seemed frozen by the power of Marcus's words and the crowd's rapt attention. "My sister and I stand before you as proof that love endures, that family survives, that there are bonds stronger than empire and chain. And I say to you now," he raised his voice to a thunderous roar, "choose what kind of Rome you want to be." The arena erupted in chaos. Some sections chanted "Maximus, Maximus," while others shouted "Caesar." The Praetorian guards looked desperately between their emperor and the crowd, uncertain where their duty lay. Senator Gracchus was on his feet, arguing with other senators, while patrician women wept openly at the romantic drama unfolding before them. And in the center of it all, Marcus and Aurelia stood together, brother and sister reunited at last, facing an uncertain fate, but no longer facing it alone. Commodus's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Enough. Seize them both. The gladiator dies, and the woman will face trial for her crimes." But as the guards finally moved forward, something extraordinary happened. From the crowd came the sound of thousands of voices, raised in unison, chanting not for blood or spectacle, but for something far more powerful. "Let them live! Let them live!" The sound washed over the arena like a tide, and in that moment, Marcus felt something he had not experienced in 7 long years: hope. The chanting grew stronger, a thunderous chorus that seemed to shake the very stones of the Colosseum. Let them live! Let them live! But beneath the unified voices, Marcus could hear something else. The subtle sound of steel being drawn from sheaths. The Praetorian guards were preparing to act, regardless of the crowd's wishes, their loyalty to Commodus overriding any sympathy they might feel. Marcus stepped protectively in front of Aurelia, his warrior's instincts taking over even though he held no weapon. 7 years of arena combat had honed his reflexes to perfection, and he could read the guards' intentions in their stance, their grip on their weapons, the way their eyes had gone cold and professional. They would strike in moments, and unarmed as he was, he would die trying to protect his sister. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. A new voice rang out across the arena, clear and commanding despite its age. "Stand down! All of you, stand down in the name of the Senate and people of Rome." Every head turned toward the imperial box, where an unexpected figure had appeared beside the furious emperor. Marcus's heart lurched as he recognized the speaker. Quintus Aurelius, the old emperor Marcus Aurelius's most trusted advisor, a man who had been like a grandfather to both Marcus and Aurelia in their youth. He was ancient now, his white beard reaching nearly to his chest, but his eyes still blazed with the authority that had once counseled emperors and shaped the destiny of nations. "Quintus," Aurelia whispered, her voice filled with wonder and relief. "He's alive." Commodus whirled on the old senator, his face contorting with rage. "How dare you interrupt? This is my command, my decision." But Quintus Aurelius stood his ground, producing a scroll sealed with imperial wax. "Not in this matter, Caesar. I carry here a document signed by your father, the divine Marcus Aurelius, on the day of his death. A document that was to be opened only in the most extreme circumstances." The crowd sensed that something momentous was about to unfold. The chanting died away as 50,000 people held their breath, waiting to see what revelation would come next. In the arena, even the guards had frozen, their training warring with curiosity about this unexpected development. Marcus felt Aurelia's hand slip into his, her fingers trembling. They had both loved the old senator in their youth. He had been the one to teach them history and philosophy, to instill in them the values that had made Rome great. If anyone could save them now, it would be him. Commodus's voice cracked with barely controlled hysteria. "That document has no power here. I am emperor. My word is law." "Your word is law," Quintus agreed calmly, "but even emperors must bow to the gods and to justice. This document concerns a sacred trust, one that supersedes even imperial authority." He raised the scroll high enough for all to see. "Shall I read it aloud, or will you honor your father's wishes in private?" For a moment, the two men stared at each other across decades of shared history and growing animosity. Commodus had always resented Quintus's influence with his father, had chafed at the old man's quiet criticism of his excesses, but even he dared not openly defy a direct command from the deified Marcus Aurelius. "Read it," he said through gritted teeth. Quintus broke the seal with ceremonial precision and unrolled the parchment. His voice, trained by years of addressing the Senate, carried clearly to every corner of the arena. "To be opened only upon the discovery that my beloved son and heir, Marcus Aurelius Maximus, yet lives, having been wrongfully declared dead by false testimony." The crowd erupted in gasps and exclamations. Even those who had begun to believe Marcus's claims were stunned to hear official confirmation from beyond the grave. "Know all present that Marcus Maximus was, by my direct command and in the presence of witnesses, declared my chosen successor, should Commodus prove unworthy of rule. Furthermore, any who have conspired to harm him or his family have committed treason against the throne and shall face the full penalty of Roman law." Commodus's face had gone ashen. He lunged for the scroll, but Quintus stepped smoothly aside, continuing to read. "I charge the Senate and people of Rome to restore him to his rightful position and to investigate all circumstances surrounding his disappearance. Let justice be done, though the heavens fall." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, Like a dam bursting, the arena exploded in chaos. Some sections cheered wildly, others sat in stunned silence, while a few die-hard supporters of Commodus booed and hissed. But the legal implications were clear to everyone. If this document was genuine, then Marcus had a legitimate claim to the throne that superseded Commodus's own. In the arena, Marcus felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. He had known that Marcus Aurelius had favored him, had treated him more like a son than Commodus ever was, but this changed everything. The old emperor had not only acknowledged him as heir, but had anticipated the very situation they now faced. "It's a forgery," Commodus screamed, his voice breaking like an adolescent's. "Lies and forgeries. This slave has no claim to anything." But Quintus was not finished. From his robes he produced a second document, this one bearing multiple seals. "The testament has been verified by 3 senators, 2 augurs, and the keeper of imperial records. Its authenticity is beyond question." He looked directly at Marcus, and his ancient eyes were bright with tears of joy. "My boy, we thought we had lost you forever." The Praetorian guards were looking at each other uncertainly now, their weapons lowered as they tried to process this incredible turn of events. If Marcus truly was the rightful heir, then their oath of loyalty to Rome itself demanded they protect him, not execute him. Senator Gracchus seized the moment, his politician's instincts guiding him to the perfect opportunity. "I call for an immediate session of the Senate. Let this matter be decided by law and custom, not by force of arms." "No," Commodus's shriek echoed off the marble walls. "I will not have my authority questioned by documents and legal trickery. Guards, kill them both. Kill them all." But something had fundamentally changed in the arena. The revelation of Marcus Aurelius's testament had shifted the balance of power in ways that went beyond mere politics. This was about legitimacy, about the very foundations of Roman rule, about whether might alone made right or whether law and justice still held meaning. The captain of the Praetorian Guard, a grizzled veteran named Lucius Varanus, stepped forward and did something that would echo through history. He planted his spear in the sand and knelt before Rocchus, his weathered face grave with the weight of his decision. "Hail Marcus Aurelius Maximus, rightful heir to the throne of Rome," he said in a voice that carried to every corner of the arena. The gesture broke the spell that had held the other guards frozen. One by one they followed their captain's example, kneeling in the blood-stained sand before the man they had been ordered to kill. It was a moment of pure drama that would be remembered and retold for generations, the mightiest warriors of Rome acknowledging a gladiator slave as their true emperor. Commodus stared down at the scene in complete shock, his world crumbling around him. Without the loyalty of his guards, without the unquestioning support of the people, he was just a man in expensive clothes screaming at forces beyond his control. But Marcus was not looking at the kneeling guards, or the cheering crowd, or even the stunned emperor. His attention was entirely focused on his sister, whose face was radiant with joy and disbelief. In her eyes, he could see the same wonder he felt, that after 7 years of darkness and despair, hope had returned to theirs in the most spectacular way imaginable. "Aurelia," he said softly, his voice meant for her alone despite the thousands who hung on every word. "Do you remember what I used to tell you when we were children, when you would wake from nightmares about father's wars?" She smiled through her tears, the expression transforming her face back into the little girl he remembered. "You said that no matter how dark the night became, the sun would always rise again. That good people could not be destroyed forever, only hidden until the right moment came for them to shine. The sun is rising, my sister, for both of us." They embraced then in the center of the Colosseum, surrounded by kneeling guards and cheering thousands. Two souls who had found each other again against all hope and all odds. The crowd roared its approval, and even hardened veterans wiped tears from their eyes at the sight of this perfect reunion. But their moment of peace was shattered by Commodus's voice, now shrill with desperation. "You think documents and pretty words can steal my throne? I am emperor by right of blood and conquest. Guards loyal to me, seize these pretenders. A handful of guards, his personal bodyguards who owed their positions directly to him, moved forward with drawn swords. But they found their path blocked by their own comrades, Praetorians who had made their choice and would not be swayed. "Stand aside," one of Commodus's loyalists snarled. "We serve Caesar, not some arena slave. We serve Rome," Captain Varanus replied calmly. "And Rome has spoken through the voice of Marcus Aurelius himself." What followed was unlike anything ever seen in the Colosseum. Roman fought Roman as the Praetorian Guard split along lines of loyalty and conscience. Steel rang against steel, as brothers in arms who had served together for years turned weapons on each other. The crowd watched in horrified fascination as the very foundations of the empire cracked and shifted before their eyes. Marcus tried to reach for a fallen sword to join the fight, but Aurelia caught his arm. "No," she said firmly. "You've shed enough blood. Let others fight for us now." And indeed the battle was brief. Outnumbered 5-1, Commodus's loyal guards were quickly overwhelmed and disarmed. When the last sword fell silent, Captain Vorenus approached Marcus with a gladius held across his palms in the traditional gesture of offering. "My lord," he said formally, "Rome offers you her sword." Marcus looked at the weapon, then at his sister's face, then at the thousands of Romans watching to see what kind of man their potential new emperor truly was. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed the sword away. "I have carried a sword for 7 years, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent arena. "I have killed in anger, in desperation for survival and for spectacle. If Rome will have me as her leader, let it be as a man who chooses mercy over vengeance, justice over retribution." The crowd's roar of approval was deafening. Here was the kind of emperor they had dreamed of, strong enough to survive the arena, wise enough to choose peace when he could have chosen war, noble enough to forgive when he had every right to seek revenge. But Commodus was not finished. Driven to desperation, he drew his own sword and leaped from the imperial box, landing heavily on the arena sand. His expensive toga was torn and dirty now, his carefully arranged hair disheveled, his face twisted with the madness of a man who saw his world ending. "If my guards will not do their duty, then I will do it myself," he screamed, raising his blade toward Marcus. "I challenge you, slave, single combat. The winner takes all." The arena fell silent once more. This was beyond politics now, beyond law and custom and imperial testaments. This was primal, two men, two visions of Rome's future, settling their differences in the oldest way known to humanity. Marcus looked at the emperor he had once served. This man who had destroyed his family and stolen 7 years of his life, and felt an unexpected emotion rising in his chest. Not hatred, not rage, but something closer to pity. Commodus had been given everything, wealth, power, the love of a great father, and had squandered it all in pursuit of pleasures that never satisfied. "I accept," Marcus said simply. The words seemed to echo forever in the vast space of the Colosseum, sealing the fate of an empire in 4 simple syllables. The circle of guards widened, creating a makeshift arena within the arena. 50,000 Romans sat in absolute silence as emperor and gladiator faced each other on the blood-soaked sand. The fate of the greatest empire in history hanging in the balance between 2 men and their swords. Commodus circled Marcus like a predator, his blade weaving hypnotic patterns in the air. Despite his reputation for excess and cruelty, he was no weakling. He had trained with the finest swordmasters in Rome, had even fought in the arena himself on carefully staged occasions. His muscles were still strong, his reflexes still sharp, and desperation had given him a dangerous edge. 7 years, he hissed, as they circled each other. 7 years you have stolen from me, living when you should have died, haunting my dreams like a ghost. Do you know how many nights I have lain awake wondering if somehow you had survived?" Marcus said nothing, his eyes never leaving Commodus's blade. The emperor was trying to unnerve him with words, a common tactic among arena fighters. But Marcus had learned patience in the Colosseum, had discovered that silence could be more powerful than any boast or threat. Your wife died screaming my name, Commodus continued, his voice dripping with malice. Your children begged for mercy that never came. They died because of your arrogance, your refusal to bow to your rightful emperor. Still Marcus remained silent, but Aurelia gasped from where she stood, with Senator Gracchus and Quintus Aurelius. She could see the pain that flickered across her brother's face, the way his jaw tightened at the mention of his murdered family. Commodus was striking at the deepest wounds, trying to goad Marcus into making a mistake born of rage and grief. I should thank you, really, the emperor pressed on. Your Livia was quite beautiful. It's a pity she had to die so quickly, though, I suppose. Marcus moved like lightning. His fist caught Commodus across the jaw with the force of a hammer blow, sending the emperor stumbling backward. But it was a mistake born of emotion, exactly what Commodus had been hoping for. As Marcus followed up his punch, the emperor's sword flicked out like a serpent's tongue, opening a long cut across the gladiator's ribs. The crowd gasped as blood began to seep through Marcus's tunic. First blood to Commodus, a psychological advantage as much as a physical one. The emperor smiled coldly, pressing his attack, while Marcus was off balance. Steel rang against steel as their blades met and parted, each seeking the opening that would end the fight forever. But Marcus's anger was cooling now, replaced by the cold focus that had kept him alive through countless arena battles. He began to read Commodus's patterns, to anticipate the emperor's attack. For all his training and natural ability, Commodus had never faced a man fighting for more than his own life. Marcus carried the weight of justice, the memory of his murdered family, the hope of a sister he had thought lost forever. Their swords locked at the hilts, bringing them face to face for a moment of strained intimacy. You cannot win, Commodus whispered, his breath hot against Marcus's face. Even if you kill me, the Praetorian Guard will never truly accept you. You're still a slave, still a killer. Rome deserves better than a gladiator on her throne. Rome deserves better than you, Marcus replied quietly, then twisted his blade free and spun away, his sword drawing a line of red across Commodus's sword arm. Now both men were bleeding, both breathing hard from the exertion and the weight of what they were fighting for. Around them, the Colosseum had become a cathedral of tension, every spectator leaning forward, afraid to miss a single moment of this legendary confrontation. Senator Gracchus stood with his arm around Aurelia's shoulders, feeling her tremble with each clash of swords. He's going to win, he murmured, more to reassure himself than her. Marcus was always the finest swordsman I ever saw. But Quintus Aurelius, who had watched both men grow from boys to leaders, was not so confident. Commodus fights with the fury of desperation, he said quietly. That can make even a lesser warrior dangerous. And Marcus carries too much pain. Sometimes that can cloud judgment at the crucial konyan. As if summoned by his words, Commodus launched a series of attacks that drove Marcus backward toward the arena wall. The emperor's blade was everywhere, at once high, low, left, right, forcing the gladiator to defend rather than attack. Steel sparked against steel in a deadly symphony that echoed off the marble seats. Marcus felt his back brush against the wall and knew he was in trouble. In the arena, getting trapped against a barrier was often a death sentence. But as Commodus raised his sword for what he clearly intended to be the killing blow, Marcus did something unexpected. Instead of trying to dodge or block, he dropped to one knee and drove his shoulder into the emperor's midsection, lifting him clear off the ground. Commodus crashed to the sand with Marcus on top of him, both their swords spinning away across the arena floor. What followed was brutal and primal, two men grappling in the dirt, using fists and elbows and knees, fighting with the savage intensity of wild animals. The crowd roared its approval. This was the kind of combat they understood, raw and honest and stripped of all pretense. Marcus's arena conditioning gave him the advantage. 7 years of constant training had honed his body to perfection, while Commodus's life of luxury had left him strong but not enduring. Gradually, inevitably, the gladiator gained the upper hand. A perfectly timed elbow to the solar plexus left Commodus gasping for air. and Marcus used the moment to pin the emperor's arms and straddle his chest. For a moment they stayed frozen in that position, both breathing hard, both knowing that the fight was over. Marcus could have snapped Commodus's neck with his bare hands, could have choked the life from the man who had destroyed everything he loved. The crowd sensed it too. They began to chant for death, for vengeance, for the bloody conclusion to this epic confrontation. But as Marcus looked down at his defeated enemy, he saw something that gave him pause. Terror, yes, and hatred, but also something else, a kind of relief. In Commodus's eyes he saw the exhaustion of a man who had been running from his own inadequacies for so long that death might actually be a mercy. "Do it," Commodus whispered, his voice barely audible above the crowd's roar. "End it. You've won." Marcus's hands moved to Commodus's throat, his fingers finding the pulse point where pressure would bring swift unconsciousness, and then death. It would be justice. It would be revenge. It would be what any reasonable man would do to the monster who had murdered his family. But then he heard Aurelius' voice cutting through the bloodthirsty chants of the crowd like a blade through silk. "Marcus, remember who you are." He looked up and found her eyes across the arena, those emerald depths that had first given him back his name and his purpose. In them he saw not bloodlust but hope, not vengeance but love. She was asking him to be the man she remembered from their childhood, the brother who had taught her that mercy was stronger than cruelty, that forgiveness was braver than revenge. Slowly, deliberately, Marcus released his grip on Commodus's throat and stood up. The emperor lay gasping in the sand, alive and defeated, but not dead. The crowd's chanting faltered as they realized what was happening. "I could kill you," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the stunned arena. "By every law of gods and men, you deserve to die for what you have done. But I will not stain my hands with murder, even the murder of a murderer." He turned to address the crowd directly, his gladiator's training allowing his words to reach every corner of the vast space. "People of Rome, for 7 years you have cheered for death. You have made heroes of killers and entertainment of suffering. But what if we chose a different path? What if we chose mercy over vengeance, justice over brutality?" The arena fell silent as 50,000 people wrestled with concepts that challenged everything they thought they understood about strength and power. Some looked confused, others angry, but many, especially among the women and elderly, began to nod in understanding. "This man," Marcus gestured toward the fallen Commodus, "has wronged me beyond measure. He has taken everything I loved and thrown it into darkness. But if I kill him now, in anger and hatred, how am I different from him? How is my justice better than his tyranny?" Senator Gracchus felt tears spring to his eyes. This was the Marcus Maximus he remembered from years past, not just a warrior but a philosopher, a man who understood that true strength lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to know when destruction was unnecessary. Commodus struggled to his feet, his face a mask of confusion and disbelief. You're letting me live? Why?" Marcus looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Because someone must break the cycle. Someone must choose to be better than their enemy. Consider this a gift, Commodus, the chance to live, and perhaps, if you have any wisdom left in you, to learn what true leadership means." But even as he spoke these words of mercy, Marcus knew that the political reality was more complex. He could spare Commodus's life, but he could not allow him to remain in power. Rome needed strong leadership, needed someone who could unite the people and restore the empire's moral authority. "However," he continued, his voice taking on the authority of command, "your reign ends here. You will abdicate the throne and retire to private life. The Senate will choose a suitable successor according to law and custom." "Never," Commodus snarled, some of his old arrogance returning now that he realized he would live. "I am emperor by divine right. No gladiator slave can dictate terms to Caesar." But his words fell flat in the charged atmosphere of the arena. The crowd had heard the testament of Marcus Aurelius, had seen the Praetorian Guard kneel before Marcus, had witnessed this demonstration of mercy and wisdom. They knew who their true leader was, regardless of titles or legal technicalities. Captain Vorenus stepped forward, his weathered face grave with the weight of duty. "Caesar," he said formally, "the Praetorian Guard withdraws its protection. You are no longer Emperor of Rome." It was a simple statement, but it carried the force of revolution. Without the support of the military, without the loyalty of the people, Commodus's authority evaporated like morning mist. He stood alone in the arena, stripped of everything that had defined him, facing a future that held nothing but exile and irrelevance. For a moment, the crowd waited to see how he would react. Would he accept defeat gracefully, or would he rage against the inevitable? The answer came as Commodus suddenly lunged toward one of the fallen swords, his face twisted with desperate fury. "If I cannot rule," he screamed, "then Rome will burn with me." But Marcus was ready. His own dive for a weapon was faster, more graceful, born of 7 years of arena reflexes. He came up with a gladius in his hand, just as Commodus reached for his blade. What followed lasted only seconds, but seemed to stretch into eternity. Commodus raised his sword high, aiming not for Marcus, but for Aurelia, who stood unprotected among the senators. It was a final act of spite, an attempt to wound his enemy in the only way left available. But as the blade began its downward arc, Marcus moved with inhuman speed. The throw was perfect, a gladiator's throw, honed by years of training and desperation. His sword flew through the air like a silver arrow, taking Commodus through the heart before the former emperor could complete his attack. The would-be assassin collapsed to the sand, his weapon falling harmlessly beside him, his eyes already growing dim with approaching death. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Commodus smiled, a genuine expression, perhaps the first honest emotion he had shown in years. "Thank you," he whispered, blood frothing from his lips. "Thank you for ending it." And with those words, he died. Not as an emperor, but as a man who had finally found peace in defeat. Marcus walked slowly to where his sword protruded from Commodus's chest. He knelt beside his fallen enemy, closing the dead man's eyes with surprising gentleness. "Rest now," he said quietly. "Your struggles are over." When he stood and turned to face the crowd, 50,000 Romans rose as one, their voices joining in a chant that would echo through history. "Hail Caesar! Hail Marcus Maximus! Hail the true Emperor of Rome!" But Marcus's attention was focused on only one person in that vast multitude. Aurelia stood among the senators, tears streaming down her face, her hands pressed to her heart. She had seen him choose mercy over vengeance, had watched him become the man she had always believed he could be. And now, impossibly, they were together again, not just as brother and sister, but as the last survivors of a family that had been thought lost forever. As he walked toward her across the blood-stained sand, Marcus felt something he had not experienced in 7 long years. Not just hope, but joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy at the simple fact that love had triumphed over hate, that family had proven stronger than empire, that sometimes, just sometimes, the good and just could rise from the ashes of their own destruction. The gladiator was dead, the emperor was born, and the greatest love story in Roman history was only beginning. 3 months had passed since that fateful day in the Colosseum, and Rome had transformed in ways that few could have imagined. Marcus Aurelius Maximus, now officially recognized as emperor by unanimous vote of the Senate, had proven to be everything the people had hoped for and more. His first acts had been to abolish the gladiatorial games, establish relief funds for the families of fallen soldiers, and begin the long process of healing a nation that had grown sick with bloodlust and corruption. But for all the public triumphs and political victories, it was the private moments that meant the most to Marcus. Each evening, as the sun set over the 7 hills of Rome, he would walk through the gardens of the imperial palace with Aurelia at his side, sharing stories of the years they had lost, slowly piecing together the fragments of their shattered family. "Do you remember the night before father left for his final campaign?" Aurelia asked as they strolled past fountains that sparkled like liquid diamonds in the fading light. She wore a simple blue stola that brought out the color of her eyes, her copper hair crowned with a circlet of silver leaves, the informal diadem of an imperial sister. Marcus smiled, his face peaceful in a way it had not been for 7 long years. The scars of the arena would always mark his body, but the deeper wounds to his soul were finally beginning to heal. He made us promise to take care of each other, no matter what happened. He said that family was the only thing stronger than empire. And you kept that promise, she said softly, stopping beside a marble statue of their father. Marcus Aurelius stood frozen in stone, his philosopher's face turned toward the stars, one hand raised as if delivering a lecture to the gods themselves. Even when you thought I was dead, even when you had lost everything else, you kept faith with family. That's what gave you the strength to survive. They stood together in comfortable silence, two souls who had found each other again against impossible odds. Around them the palace gardens bloomed with roses and jasmine, filling the air with perfume that seemed to wash away the lingering stench of the arena. Marcus had ordered the Colosseum sealed, declaring it a monument to the folly of his predecessor rather than a place of continued entertainment. Marcus, Aurelia said suddenly, her voice carrying a note of concern that made him turn to look at her. There's something I need to tell you, something I've been afraid to mention these past months. A chill ran down his spine at her after losing her once. The thought of any threat to his sister's well-being was almost Andalus. What is it? Are you ill? Has someone threatened you? She shook her head, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Nothing like that. It's just, I'm not the only survivor, Marcus. There's someone else from our old life who lived through Commodus's purges. His heart stopped. What do you mean? Who? Your son. The words hit him like a physical blow. Marcus staggered backward, his hand reaching out to steady himself against the marble statue of his father. His son, little Lucius, who had been barely 5 years old when the soldiers came, who had loved nothing more than riding wooden horses and listening to stories of distant battles. That's impossible, he whispered. I saw the death warrant. All the children. The warrant listed 3 children, Aurelia said gently. But you had 4, remember? The baby that was born just before you left for Germania. The one Livia was carrying when you received your final orders from father. Marcus's mind reeled as the implications crashed over him. In the chaos of that final campaign, in the rush to secure the northern borders before winter set in, he had indeed left before the birth of his 4th child. The baby would have been born while he was away, would have been too young to be included in Commodus's initial intelligence reports. A daughter, he breathed, the memory coming back like sunlight breaking through clouds. Livia wrote to me, a daughter they named Claudia, after my mother. She lived because she was being nursed by a peasant woman in the countryside when the soldiers came, Aurelia continued, tears streaming down her face. The wet nurse fled with her when she heard about the massacre. She's been raising her as her own daughter these past 7 years. Marcus felt his knees give way. He sank onto a marble bench, his hands shaking as the full weight of this revelation settled on him. Not only had he regained his sister, but somewhere in the vast empire he ruled, his daughter, his baby girl who would now be 7 years old, was alive and waiting to be found. Where? He managed to ask. Where is she? A farming village called Tusculum, about a day's ride south of the city. Senator Gracchus has had people watching over her all these years, making sure she was safe and cared for. He was waiting for the right moment to tell you, waiting until your position was secure enough that bringing her back wouldn't put her in danger. As if summoned by his name, Senator Gracchus appeared on the garden path, his aged face creased with the kind of smile that comes from delivering the most wonderful news imaginable. Behind him walked a woman Marcus didn't recognize, middle-aged, wearing the simple brown dress of a farmer's wife, her weathered hands holding gently to those of a small girl with dark hair and eyes, the color of summer storms. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. The child was unmistakably his daughter. She had Livia's delicate features and his own stubborn chin, and the way she carried herself spoke of intelligence and strength that reminded him of Aurelia at that age. But more than physical resemblance, there was something in her bearing, some indefinable quality that marked her as belonging to their bloodline. "Claudia," he whispered, and the name seemed to hang in the air like a prayer. The little girl looked up at him with curious but unafraid eyes. She had been told she was coming to meet an important man, but the wet nurse, a woman named Helena, who had loved her as her own, had prepared her carefully for this moment. "Are you the emperor?" Claudia asked in a clear, sweet voice that made Marcus's heart clench with joy and pain. "Helena says you might be my real father, but I don't remember having a father before." Marcus dropped to his knees in the gravel path, bringing himself to her eye level. Up close, the resemblance to Livia was even more striking. The same gentle curve of the cheek, the same way of tilting her head when thinking, the same fearless directness in her gaze. "I am," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "And you are my daughter, my beautiful, brave daughter, who I thought I had lost forever." Claudia studied his face with the serious concentration that only children can muster. "You look sad," she observed. "Helena cries sometimes when she thinks about things that happened before I was born. Do you cry about things too?" The innocent question broke something inside Marcus that had been holding back 7 years of grief and loss. Tears began streaming down his face, not tears of sorrow, but of overwhelming gratitude and love. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but right now I'm crying because I'm happy. Because I thought I would never see you again. And here you are, beautiful and strong and perfect." Without hesitation, Claudia stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around his neck, hugging him with the fierce intensity that children reserve for moments of instinctive connection. "Don't be sad anymore," she whispered in his ear. "Helena says that when people love each other, they don't have to be sad even when bad things happen." Marcus held his daughter close, breathing in the scent of sunshine and wildflowers that clung to her hair, feeling her small heart beating against his chest. Around them, the others watched with tears in their eyes as the last piece of a shattered family clicked back into place. When they finally separated, Claudia looked around the garden with wide eyes, taking in the marble statues and flowing fountains and carefully tended flower beds. "Is this where I'm going to live now?" "If you want to," Marcus said carefully. He had learned enough about children to know that rushing into major changes could be frightening for them. "But Helena can stay with us too, if that would make you feel better. She's been your mother in all the ways that matter most." Helena stepped forward, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "My lord," she said in the accent of the countryside, "it would be the greatest honor of my life to continue caring for Claudia, if you would have me. She has been the light of my world these 7 years." "Then you are family too," Marcus said simply. "Anyone who loved my daughter when I could not is welcome in my home for as long as you wish to stay." As the sun set completely and torches were lit throughout the garden, the reunited family made their way back toward the palace proper. Claudia chattered excitedly about everything she saw, her natural curiosity and fearlessness making Marcus smile despite the emotional turbulence of the day. Aurelia walked beside them, her hand resting lightly on her niece's shoulder, her face radiant with joy. "Uncle Marcus," Claudia said suddenly, looking up at him with a frown of concentration. "Just Marcus," he corrected gently. "Or father, if you'd like. I'm your father, remember." "Father," she repeated, testing the word. "Father, Helena told me that my real mother went to live with the gods." "Is that true?" The question pierced his heart, but Marcus had learned that children deserved honest answers, even about difficult subjects. "Yes," he said softly. "Your mother Livia was the most wonderful woman who ever lived, and she loved you very much. She had to go away before she could see you grow up, but I know she would be so proud of the strong, kind girl you've become." Claudia nodded solemnly, accepting this with the matter-of-fact resilience that children often show in the face of loss. "Will you tell me stories about her? Helena doesn't know any stories about my real mother." "I will tell you every story I can remember," Marcus promised. "I'll tell you how she laughed and how she sang while she worked in her garden, and how much she wanted to meet you. I'll tell you about your brothers too, and about all the family that loved you even though they couldn't stay to watch you grow up." They had reached the palace steps when Claudia suddenly stopped and looked back at the gardens, her small face serious. "Father, are you going to go away again? Helena says that important men sometimes have to leave their families to do important things." The question cut deeper than any sword thrust Marcus had ever endured. He knelt down again, taking his daughter's hands in his scarred and calloused ones. "Claudia, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I have spent 7 years learning what it means to lose the people you love most. I will never, ever leave you again unless you ask me to. Do you understand? Nothing, not duty, not empire, not all the armies of the world is more important to me than you and Aunt Aurelia." She smiled then, the radiant smile of a child who has received exactly the reassurance she needed. "Good, because I don't want you to go away. I like having a father." As they climbed the marble steps together, Marcus felt something settle in his soul that had been restless and searching for 7 long years. He had his sister back. He had his daughter back. The family that Commodus had tried to destroy had risen from the ashes, stronger than ever, bound together by love that had proven more enduring than hatred, more powerful than empire itself. That night, as he tucked Claudia into a bed that had been hastily prepared in the chamber next to his own, she looked up at him, with eyes that were already growing heavy with sleep. "Father, will you stay until I fall asleep?" "Of course," he said, settling into a chair beside her bed. "I'll stay as long as you need me to." "Forever?" she asked sleepily. "Forever," he promised. And as his daughter drifted off to sleep in the palace that would now be her home, Marcus Aurelius Maximus, Gladiator, general, emperor, but most importantly father and brother, finally understood what true victory looked like. It wasn't about conquest or glory, or the cheers of crowds. It was about this: a child sleeping safely while those who loved her kept watch, a family reunited against all odds, love proving once again that it was the strongest force in all the world. Outside, Rome slept peacefully under the protection of an emperor who had learned in the arena that some things were worth fighting for, and in the palace gardens that some things were worth living for. The greatest love story in the history of the empire was complete, and its ending was not written in blood or carved in marble, but lived out in the simple, perfect moments that make up a life shared with those we love most. 5 years had passed since that magical evening when Claudia first came home to the palace, and the Roman Empire had entered what historians would later call its Golden Dawn. Under Marcus's wise and compassionate rule, the legions had transformed from instruments of conquest into protectors of peace. Trade flourished along roads that were safer than they had been in generations. The arts and sciences bloomed in an atmosphere of intellectual freedom that reminded many of the best days under Marcus Aurelius. But it was not the political achievements that would be remembered most about Emperor Marcus Maximus. It was the love story that had begun in the blood-soaked sand of the Colosseum and grown into something that touched every corner of the empire. On this particular morning, as spring painted the Roman hills in shades of green and gold, Marcus stood on the palace balcony overlooking the city he had sworn to protect. At 38, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced the worst the world could offer and emerged stronger for it. The arena scars still marked his body, but they had faded to silver lines that spoke of survival rather than suffering. "Deep thoughts, my lord." The voice belonged to Captain Varinus, now promoted to prefect of the Praetorian Guard, whose loyalty had never wavered in the 5 years since that day in the arena. Marcus smiled without turning around. "Just watching Rome wake up, old friend. Have you ever noticed how peaceful the city looks in the early morning, before the merchants and politicians begin their daily battles?" Varinus joined him at the marble railing, his weathered face creasing in a rare smile. "I've noticed that you've grown philosophical in your old age, Caesar. The arena taught you to fight. At peace has taught you to think." "Peace," Marcus repeated softly. "Sometimes I wonder if I truly deserve it. Lucius, So many men died by my hand in that cursed place. So many families mourned because I needed to survive another day. And because you survived, how many more live in safety now? Vorenus counted, how many children sleep peacefully because their emperor understands the true cost of violence. Don't let guilt cloud your vision of what you've accomplished. Before Marcus could respond, the sound of running feet echoed from the corridor behind them. Claudia burst onto the balcony, her 12-year-old frame still small but radiating the kind of energy that reminded Marcus daily of the joy that children bring to the world. Her dark hair flew behind her like a banner, and her storm-grey eyes, so like his own, sparkled with excitement. "Father, father, you have to come quickly." She grabbed his hand and began tugging him toward the door. "Aunt Aurelia says it's time." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. For months, they had been preparing for this day, but somehow it had still managed to catch him off guard. "Are you certain? It's not too early?" "The midwife says the baby is coming whether we're ready or not," Claudia said with the matter-of-fact tone that children use when discussing the mysteries of adult life. "And Aunt Aurelia wants you there. She says she's not having her first child without her brother beside her." Marcus was already moving, his long strides carrying him swiftly through corridors lined with marble statues and painted frescoes. Servants scattered before his urgent passage, word spreading through the palace like wildfire that the imperial heir was about to be born. 2 years earlier, Aurelia had married Senator Lucius Verus, a distinguished man 20 years her senior, whose first wife had died in childbirth. It had been a marriage born of genuine affection rather than political necessity. Verus was a widower with grown children who had courted Aurelia with the patience and gentleness of a man who understood that love could not be rushed or forced. Their wedding had been the social event of the decade, with citizens lining the streets to cheer for the woman who had helped save their emperor's soul. Marcus reached the birthing chamber just as another contraction gripped his sister. Through the partially open door he could see Aurelia propped up on silk pillows, her copper hair dark with perspiration, her face flushed with effort, but radiant with anticipation. Lucius Verus knelt beside the bed, holding her hand, and murmuring words of encouragement in the tender voice of a man completely devoted to his wife. "Marcus," Aurelia called out when she saw him in the doorway, "come in, you fool. This child is your blood too." He entered the chamber hesitantly, still somewhat uncomfortable with the intimate mysteries of childbirth. But Aurelia's smile banished his awkwardness, reminding him that he had been present for every other important moment in her life. "Why should this be different? How long?" he asked the midwife, a competent woman named Livia, whom they had chosen partly for her name and partly for her reputation as the finest birthing attendant in Rome. "Not long now, my lord," she replied without looking up from her work. "The child is eager to meet the world." For the next hour, Marcus held his sister's free hand, while her husband held the other, both men united in their desire to support the woman they loved through this ancient trial of bringing new life into the world. Claudia had been banished to the gardens with Helena, but her excited chatter could be heard through the windows as she speculated about whether the baby would be a boy or girl, whether it would have Aunt Aurelia's red hair or Uncle Lucius's brown eyes. When the moment finally came, it arrived with shocking suddenness. One moment Aurelia was gripping their hands and breathing through another contraction. The next she was crying out in a voice that mixed pain and triumph and overwhelming joy. The midwife's skilled hands guided the child into the world, and suddenly the chamber filled with the angry wail of a newborn demanding attention. "A son," Livia announced, lifting the baby for all to see. "A perfect, healthy son." Marcus felt tears spring to his eyes as he looked at his nephew, red-faced and furious, tiny fists waving in indignation at being expelled from his warm, dark sanctuary. The child had a shock of dark hair and what appeared to be his father's strong jaw, but when he opened his eyes for the first time, they were the unmistakable storm grey of the Maximus bloodline. "Let me see him," Aurelia whispered, exhausted but radiant. Lucius helped her sit up as the midwife placed the cleaned and swaddled baby in her arms. The transformation was instantaneous, from laboring woman to protective mother, her entire being focused on the small miracle she held. "He's beautiful," Lucius said, his voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely perfect. What will you call him?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Aurelia looked up at her brother, her eyes bright with tears of joy. "Marcus," she said simply. "Marcus Verus, after the two finest men I have ever known." The gesture hit Marcus with unexpected force. To have his name carried forward, to know that this child would grow up hearing stories of his uncle, the Gladiator Emperor, to see the family line continue despite all the efforts to destroy it. It was almost too much to bear. "He'll need a strong name," Marcus said, gently stroking the baby's downy cheek with one scarred finger. "The world is full of challenges, little one. You'll need all the strength you can find." "He'll have more than strength," Aurelia said confidently. "He'll have love, more love than any child has ever known." As if summoned by some unseen signal, Claudia appeared in the doorway, her face alight with curiosity and delight. "Can I see him? Can I hold him? Is he really my cousin? Come here, sweetheart," Aurelia called, making room on the bed. "Come meet your cousin, Marcus." Claudia approached with the careful reverence that children show when confronted with something miraculous. She peered down at the baby's sleeping face, her expression serious and thoughtful. "He's so small," she whispered. "Was I ever that small?" "Smaller," Marcus assured her. "Much smaller. And just as perfect. Will he live with us? Will I get to help take care of him?" "He'll live with his parents," Marcus explained gently. "But they live here in the palace too, so you'll see him every day. And yes, you can help take care of him, if his mother doesn't mind." "I don't mind at all," Aurelia said, smiling at her niece. "I think every child needs a big cousin to look up to." As the afternoon wore on, word of the birth spread throughout Rome. Citizens gathered in the forums and marketplaces, raising toasts to the health of the imperial nephew. Senators sent congratulatory messages, foreign ambassadors prepared gifts, and poets began composing verses about the newest member of the blessed family that had brought peace and prosperity to the empire. But in the quiet of the palace chamber, none of that mattered. What mattered was the sight of Aurelia cradling her son, while her husband stroked her hair, while Marcus held Claudia on his lap and told her stories about the baby's ancestors, while Helena bustled about making sure everyone was comfortable and fed. As evening fell and oil lamps were lit throughout the chamber, casting everything in warm, golden light, Marcus found himself thinking about the twisting path that had brought them all to this moment. 7 years ago he had knelt in the arena sand, broken by grief and convinced that love was nothing but a memory to torture him. Now he sat surrounded by family, blood family and chosen family, watching his sister nurse his nephew while his daughter curled against his shoulder in sleepy contentment. "Do you remember," Aurelia said softly, "what father used to say about the strength of families?" "That they were like the roots of great trees," Marcus replied. "Cut one down, and 10 more would grow from what remained." "Our tree has grown strong again," she observed, looking around the room at the faces of those she loved most. "Stronger than before, I think, because we know how precious this is. We know the cost," Marcus agreed, "and that makes us treasure what we have." Little Marcus stirred in his mother's arms, making the soft mewing sounds that newborns use to communicate their needs. Aurelia adjusted his swaddling and began to hum a lullaby that their own mother had sung to them decades ago, a melody that connected past and present, that wove the story of their family into an unbroken chain of love and memory. "Sing with me," she whispered to Marcus, and he did, his deep voice blending with her soprano in harmonies that filled the chamber with music more beautiful than any performance in the greatest theaters of Rome. Claudia's eyes drifted closed as she listened, her small body relaxing completely against her father's chest. Helena sat in the corner, her weathered hands folded in her lap, tears of pure happiness streaming down her face as she watched the family she had helped to preserve celebrate their newest miracle. And in that moment, as voices rose in ancient song and lamplight painted everything in gold, Marcus Aurelius Maximus, Gladiator, general, emperor, father, brother, protector of Rome, finally understood the true meaning of victory. It wasn't about armies conquered or enemies defeated. It wasn't about crowds cheering or monuments built to last 1,000 years. Victory was this: a child sleeping safely in her father's arms, while her aunt sang lullabies to a newborn cousin. A family circle unbroken by time or tragedy. Love proving once again that it was the strongest force in all the world. Victory was the quiet moment when pain transformed into gratitude, when loss became the foundation for deeper appreciation of what remained. Outside, Rome slept peacefully under the protection of an emperor who had learned that the greatest battles were not fought with swords, but with the courage to remain open to love, even after love had been lost. The Colosseum stood empty and silent, its blood-stained sands slowly being reclaimed by grass and wildflowers, while in the palace gardens, night-blooming jasmine filled the air with perfume that spoke of new beginnings and eternal hope. The gladiator had pointed his sword at her, ready to end what he thought was his final fight. But her words, two simple words that recognized him, claimed him, loved him, had indeed brought him to his knees and changed the course of destiny itself. "My brother," she had whispered across the arena sands 7 years ago, and in speaking those words, Aurelia had not only saved Marcus's life, but had saved his soul. She had reminded him who he was beneath the scars and the legend, had given him back his name, and his purpose and his capacity for hope. Now as the night deepened and the baby slept and Claudia dreamed in her father's arms, that salvation felt complete. The broken gladiator had become a whole man again, not through conquest or revenge, but through the simple revolutionary act of allowing himself to be loved. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Not the defeat of enemies, but the triumph of love over loss, of family over fear, of hope over despair. The story that had begun in blood and darkness had ended in light and joy, proving that sometimes, if we are very lucky and very brave, our deepest wounds can become the birthplace of our greatest blessings. The sun would rise again on Rome, as it always had, and always would. But for the first time in 7 years, Marcus Maximus would greet it not as a man haunted by the past, but as a man blessed with a present so rich that it made every moment of suffering worthwhile. Love had conquered all, just as the poets had always promised it would.